Top 1. The Makwahwitl. The Makwahwitl did not look like a weapon designed to end civilizations. It appeared as a wooden paddle, flat, wide, and carved from the dense heartwood of oak or pine. It sat comfortably in one hand, giving no immediate indication of what it was capable of. Then you saw the edges. Embedded along both sides in tight alternating rows were blades of obsidian, volcanic glass formed over millions of years beneath the earth, fractured into shapes so geometrically perfect that modern scanning electron microscopes have confirmed obsidian edges reach a thickness of just 3 nanometers. For comparison, surgical steel blades measure roughly 300 to 500 nanometers at their sharpest point. The Makwahwitl was not primitive. It was a precision instrument built from one of the sharpest materials the natural world has ever produced. Spanish conquistadors arriving in Mesoamerica in the early 16th century AD were not easily impressed. They came armored in steel, mounted on horses, and carrying weapons that had conquered half of Europe. What they encountered in the hands of Aztec warriors stopped them cold. Their written accounts, preserved in colonial-era chronicles, described the Makwahwitl not with mockery, but with unmistakable fear. One of the most repeated observations documented in multiple independent soldier accounts was that a single well-executed swing from this weapon could completely sever the neck of a horse, not wound it, not stagger it, but decapitate it cleanly. That detail alone forces a recalibration of everything you think you know about pre-colonial warfare. But the true engineering of this weapon went far beyond raw cutting power. The obsidian rows were not arranged for clean kills. They were arranged for maximum tissue destruction. Each blade entered the flesh at a slightly different angle, creating a jagged tearing effect rather than a clean slice. The resulting wounds were irregular, deep, and filled with microscopic volcanic glass fragments that resisted extraction. Aztec warriors and their physicians understood wound treatment, but their enemies did not have the tools or knowledge to address what the Makwahwitl left behind. Infections were near certain, and recovery was rare, which was entirely by design. The Aztec military did not primarily fight to kill. Their warfare was structured around the capture of living prisoners for ritual sacrifice to their gods, most notably Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war. A dead enemy on the battlefield was a failed objective. The Makwahwitl was therefore engineered to incapacitate, to destroy the legs, arms, and joints while keeping the torso and vital organs intact long enough for the prisoner to be taken alive. You either fell to the blade and were dragged to the temple, or you died from your wounds before you could be captured. There was no third option, and no version of that outcome ended well. The last confirmed physical specimen was destroyed in a fire at the Royal Armory in Madrid in 1884 AD. What survives are colonial illustrations, written descriptions, and the quiet terror embedded in every account that ever mentioned it. Top 2. The Scythed Chariot. The Scythed Chariot was not subtle. There was no deception built into its design, no psychological misdirection, and no element of surprise hidden within its construction. It announced itself from a distance. The thunder of hooves, the grinding of iron-rimmed wheels against dry earth, and the low metallic whistle of curved blades spinning at speed through open air. Every soldier standing in its path knew exactly what it was and exactly what it intended to do. That was part of the design. Fear arrived before the blades did, and fear in a packed infantry formation was its own kind of weapon. The Scythed Chariot was a Persian and Near Eastern war machine refined over centuries, built around a single, unambiguous purpose. A standard war chariot carried archers or javelin throwers and relied on speed and elevation for advantage. The scythed version stripped that function away almost entirely. In its place, long curved iron blades were mounted horizontally outward from the wheel axles, extending several feet on each side. Additional blades were sometimes fixed beneath the carriage frame, angled toward the ground. When the chariot reached full gallop, those blades did not swing or rotate independently. They moved with the wheels locked at axle height, precisely the height of a standing soldier's thighs, hips, and lower abdomen. Persian King Darius III brought 200 of these machines to the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BCE, deploying them against the army of Alexander the Great on a vast flat plain in what is now northern Iraq. Darius had deliberately chosen the terrain, reportedly ordering the ground leveled in advance to give his chariots unobstructed speed. The deployment represented one of the largest coordinated uses of scythe chariots in recorded military history. Ancient sources, including Arrian and Diodorus Siculus, documented the engagement in detail, and their accounts of what happened when these chariots met unprepared formations are not easy to read. Soldiers caught in tight ranks with no room to move were struck at waist level by blades traveling at the full speed of panicked war horses. Accounts describe men cut through at the midsection, limbs separated at the hip and thigh, and entire file formations disrupted by the passage of a single vehicle. The wounds were catastrophic and immediate, designed not merely to kill, but to create visible horror within surrounding troops still waiting for contact. Alexander's response was tactical rather than technological. He trained his infantry to open their ranks on command, creating deliberate corridors through which the chariots could pass without contact. The machines would then continue beyond the formation, spent and harmless, where they were dealt with by rear-positioned troops, brilliant in its simplicity and completely devastating to the weapon's entire premise. No blade, however sharp, can cut what it cannot reach. The scythe chariot did not disappear because a superior weapon replaced it. It disappeared because disciplined soldiers simply stepped aside. An instrument of absolute physical destruction was neutralized not with iron or fire, but with patience and a gap in the line. That quiet obsolescence may be the most unsettling part of its story. Top 3, the nest of bees. The nest of bees did not look like the future. It looked like a wooden box, hexagonal in shape, compact enough to be carried and positioned by a small team. It sat low to the ground with 32 tubes arranged in a tight cluster, facing outward at a calculated angle. There were no moving parts visible from the outside, and no complexity in its appearance that would signal to an enemy what was about to happen. Then the fuses were lit and everything changed. Within seconds, 32 rocket-propelled arrows left those tubes simultaneously, spreading outward in a pre-calculated pattern that covered not a single target, but an entire formation of human beings standing in open ground. The sound alone, by contemporary accounts, was enough to break untested soldiers before a single arrow landed. China's relationship with gunpowder predates the Western world's understanding of it by centuries. By the time the Ming Dynasty formalized and mass-produced the Huolongchu, known in translation as the nest of bees, the underlying chemistry of black powder propellant had already been refined through generations of military experimentation. The weapon was documented in the Huolongjing, a comprehensive Chinese military treatise compiled in the mid-14th century AD that cataloged firearms, rockets, and explosive devices with remarkable technical precision. The Huolongjing was not theoretical. It was a field manual written by and for people actively deploying these weapons in combat. Each of the 32 tubes housed an arrow with a paper or bamboo casing packed with black powder attached near the shaft. When ignited, the propellant charge launched the arrow with significantly greater velocity and range than any conventional bow could achieve. The spread pattern was not random. The tubes were angled deliberately to distribute the arrows across a target area, functioning less like a precision weapon and more like an area denial system. A single nest of bees could not guarantee the death of one specific soldier. It could, however, guarantee that everyone standing within a defined zone had a rocket-propelled arrow passing through that zone at the same moment. Ming military commanders did not deploy these devices individually. Battlefield records and military documentation from the period describe coordinated launches involving hundreds of units firing in sequence or simultaneously. The mathematical result was thousands of rocket arrows saturating enemy positions in overlapping waves. Each salvo followed almost immediately by another. Infantry formations, cavalry lines, and siege positions all became untenable under that kind of sustained area covering fire. Modern military historians studying this weapon have noted something that rarely gets acknowledged in Western accounts of weapons history. What the Ming Dynasty built and deployed in the 14th century AD was, by functional definition, rocket artillery. It was not a precursor or a primitive ancestor. It was a working, battlefield-tested, mass-produced rocket delivery system, operational more than 6 centuries before the first modern rocket artillery systems appeared in 20th century warfare. History simply chose to file it under curiosity rather than revolution. Top 4. The Inouye Revolver. The Inouye Revolver looked like something designed by a man who had never been told the word enough. Where standard revolvers of the mid-19th century AD carried 5 or 6 rounds in a single rotating cylinder, the Inouye revolver arrived with a cylinder so large, so ambitious, and so structurally unprecedented that it functionally redefined what the word revolver was even supposed to mean. 48 rounds, not in a magazine, not across multiple weapons, and not through any reload. 48 individual chambers were built into a single rotating cylinder, all accessible in sequence and all ready to fire from one continuous pulling of the trigger. On paper, it was the most formidable handheld firearm ever conceived at the time of its creation. In practice, it was something considerably more complicated. Joseph Inouye, a British inventor, patented this weapon in 1855 AD during a period of intense global competition in firearm design. The mid-19th century was an era of rapid mechanical innovation in weapons engineering, with inventors across Europe and America racing to solve the fundamental limitation of every handheld firearm: the reload. Every second spent reloading was a second of total vulnerability. The soldier or civilian who ran dry first died first. Inouye's solution was architectural. Rather than improving the reload process, he proposed eliminating its relevance entirely by building a cylinder large enough to make reloading a distant concern rather than an immediate one. The cylinder he engineered to house those 48 chambers was, by mechanical necessity, enormous. It extended outward from the frame of the weapon in a wide spoke-like configuration that resembled, in several contemporary descriptions, a wheel more than a conventional firearm component. Each chamber was precisely machined and individually accessible through the cylinder's rotation mechanism. The engineering required to align 48 chambers sequentially with a single barrel and firing mechanism was, by the standards of 1855 AD, genuinely sophisticated work. While he solved the mechanical problem, what he could not fully solve was the physical one. The weight of a fully loaded 48-chamber cylinder was substantial and distributed unevenly around the weapon's central axis. That weight created a balance problem that no grip adjustment or frame modification could adequately correct. Aiming the weapon with any precision required compensating for a mass distribution that conventional firearm training had never prepared a shooter to handle. The Inouye revolver did not aim like a firearm. It aimed like a negotiation between the shooter and the weapon's own gravitational preferences. The holster problem compounded everything. Standard holsters of the period were designed around the predictable geometry of conventional revolvers. The Inouye's protruding cylinder made holster carry functionally impossible without custom equipment that did not yet exist. The weapon had to be carried openly in the hand, which transformed every moment of transport into an active physical burden. 48 rounds meant nothing if the shooter's arm gave out before the fight began. The Inouye revolver was a brilliant answer to the wrong version of the problem. Top 5. The Joie. There is a specific kind of fear that arrives not from the unknown, but from perfect clarity. Most weapons on a battlefield allowed a soldier some psychological distance. An arrow came from far away. A sword required closing to a range where training could theoretically intervene. A spear could be deflected or dodged by a prepared defender. The Joie allowed none of that distance, physical or psychological. Every soldier who saw it understood its function immediately and completely. It was not ambiguous or multifunctional. It was a 6-foot iron pole topped with a massive iron claw, modeled with deliberate anatomical precision on the grasping hand of a predator. It was built to reach across the space between two human beings and take something away from one of them by force. Usually the shield, sometimes the rider, and occasionally both. The weapon traces its origins through Chinese military history, appearing in texts and weapon catalogs spanning several dynasties, with references found in sources associated with ancient and medieval Chinese warfare. The construction was straightforward in concept and brutal in implication. A long iron or iron-reinforced pole, typically around 6 feet in length, provided the reach and the leverage. At its head sat the defining feature, a curved, multi-tined claw. Each talon was shaped and sharpened to grip, pierce, and tear rather than simply cut. The design was not decorative. Every curve in those talons served a mechanical purpose. engineered to hook into surfaces, lock under edges, and resist being shaken free once contact was made. The primary battlefield application targeted the shield, which was the most critical piece of defensive equipment carried by ancient and medieval infantry. A soldier without a shield was exposed, disoriented, and psychologically compromised in ways that went beyond the purely physical. The Juaz operator would swing the weapon in a controlled arc, driving the talons into the face or edge of an enemy shield, then use the pole's length as a lever to wrench it sideways or completely out of the defender's grip. The same motion that stripped the shield could be redirected immediately downward or inward, driving those same curved talons into the now exposed arm, shoulder, neck, or torso. The sequence from defense removal to wound delivery could be completed in a single fluid movement by a trained user. Against cavalry, the weapon's application became something closer to spectacular violence. A mounted soldier at full gallop represented enormous momentum, and the Juaz iron weight and claw geometry were sufficient for a skilled operator to hook into a rider's armor, clothing, or body and use that momentum against them, dragging them from the saddle and onto the ground where they became immediately vulnerable. The pole's iron construction also meant that even without claw contact, the weapon functioned as a devastating bludgeon. The mass alone, swung at speed, could shatter bone through armor. Chinese military accounts consistently describe the Zhua as among the most psychologically destabilizing weapons in any formation's arsenal. Soldiers feared it not because it was mysterious, but because standing in front of it, they could see every single thing it intended to do to them. Top 6. The Bagnak. Most weapons declared themselves. They had length, weight, and visible geometry that announced their purpose to anyone standing nearby. Carrying one required commitment, a visible choice that changed how people looked at you, how guards responded to you, and how far you could travel before someone decided your weapon was a problem. The Bagnak made none of those announcements. It fit entirely within a closed human fist. 4 or 5 curved iron or steel blades, each modeled with careful anatomical accuracy on the individual claw of a tiger, were mounted across a compact crossbar fitted with 2 rings that slipped over the fingers to hold the weapon flush against the palm. When the hand was closed naturally, the blades disappeared completely. When it opened in a raking motion, they emerged and did their work in a fraction of a second. The Bagnak originated in the Indian subcontinent, with its use most heavily documented in the Maratha and Rajput warrior traditions. The name itself translates directly from Sanskrit-derived languages as tiger claw, and the design intent was never hidden in its etymology. It was built to replicate the specific mechanical action of a large predatory cat strike, not a stab or a slash from a distance, but a close-quarters raking motion delivered from a hand that appeared empty until the final moment. The wound pattern it created was distinctive, multiple parallel lacerations running in curved lines across skin and muscle, deep enough to sever tissue but spaced in a way that confused investigators unfamiliar with the weapon. In a region where tigers were present and attacks were documented, those wounds told a story that had nothing to do with a human assailant. That cover was not incidental, it was architectural. The most historically documented use of the Bagnak occurred on November 10, 1659 AD, at a meeting between the Maratha king Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and Afzal Khan, a senior general of the Adil Shahi Sultanate of Bijapur. Afzal Khan was a formidable military commander, dispatched to either capture or eliminate Shivaji, whose growing power represented a direct threat to Adil Shahi authority. The two agreed to a personal meeting, supposedly a peace negotiation, held in a tent near Pratapgarh Fort in present-day Maharashtra. Both men came with concealed weapons. Afzal Khan reportedly moved first, attempting to seize or stab Shivaji during the embrace of greeting. Shivaji's response was immediate. The Bagnak concealed in his hand opened across Afzal Khan's abdomen in a single motion. The general died from his wounds, and Shivaji walked away from an assassination disguised as a peace summit. Certain versions of the Bagnak introduced a further layer of lethality that made even shallow wounds potentially fatal. Blades coated with slow-acting contact poisons meant that a strike which failed to reach vital organs could still guarantee death over the following hours or days, with symptoms that resembled illness rather than injury. It was a weapon that asked its victims to trust a hand that was already armed. Top 7. The Lantern Shield. Renaissance Italy did not invent violence. Every civilization before it had developed, refined, and exported violence with considerable creativity. What Renaissance Italy invented was the infrastructure of personal violence, the social architecture of the duel, the vendetta, the contracted killing, and the street ambush conducted not between armies on open fields, but between individuals in narrow cobblestone alleys where the only witnesses were shadows. In that specific environment, the standard weapons of warfare became inadequate. A battlefield sword was designed for open space and visible opponents. A conventional shield covered the body, but contributed nothing to the offensive sequence. Renaissance Italy's answer to this problem was not a better sword or a stronger shield. It was an entirely new category of object. It was a weapon system so densely engineered for its specific context that it has never been replicated before or since, standing today as arguably the most functionally complex personal combat device ever manufactured for a single user. The lantern shield appeared in Italy during the 16th century AD, with surviving examples and detailed illustrations preserved in arms collections, including the royal armories in Leeds. Its base component was a metal shield fitted with a gauntlet attachment that covered and protected the entire forearm of the non-dominant hand, freeing the dominant hand to operate a separate sword while the shield arm remained actively weaponized. Along one edge of the shield ran a fixed sword blade, converting the defensive surface into an offensive cutting tool simultaneously. Across other sections of the shield face, multiple outward-facing iron spikes projected forward, designed to punish any opponent who moved too close with a grab or body press. A serrated hook was integrated for a specific tactical purpose, catching an opponent's blade and twisting it, disarming them mid-exchange with a leverage motion rather than superior strength. At the center of everything sat the lantern, a small but functional oil lamp enclosed within the shield's body, accessible through a cover that could be opened or closed with a single controlled movement of the shield arm. In complete darkness, both combatants were blind and equal. The lantern shield destroyed that equality permanently and instantly. The tactical sequence it enabled was precise. The user would engage in darkness, using the shield spikes and blade defensively, while their opponents swung at sounds and movement rather than visible targets. At the chosen moment when the opponent was closest, most committed to an attack, and most unable to retreat, the lantern cover was opened directly toward their face. After extended darkness, even a small flame produced temporary but total blindness in the exposed eyes. The window of incapacitation lasted only seconds, but it needed only seconds. Italian civic records from this period document street duels, assassination attempts, and personal vendettas carried out after dark with a frequency that explains why such a weapon found a market. The lantern shield was not a theoretical exercise in engineering. It was a commercial product built to meet documented demand. Someone was buying these, which means someone needed them, which means the streets that required them were exactly as dangerous as the weapon suggests. Top 8. The Roman Scissor. The Roman arena was not a battlefield. It operated by different rules, different aesthetics, and different demands than open warfare, and the weapons it produced reflected that distinction completely. A battlefield weapon needed to function across chaotic, unpredictable terrain against variable opponents under conditions of exhaustion, fear, and tactical confusion. An arena weapon needed to do something more specific and, in some ways, more demanding. It needed to work reliably in a controlled space against trained opponents who had studied every conventional weapon system and developed counters to all of them. The gladiatorial community of ancient Rome was, by the later imperial period, a highly specialized professional culture with defined fighter categories, documented fighting styles, and equipment so precisely tailored to its context that several pieces of gladiatorial gear have no parallel anywhere else in military history. The scissor is the most extreme example of that design philosophy, taken to its absolute limit. The weapon encased the gladiator's entire forearm in a hardened steel or iron tube, custom fitted to the individual fighter's arm dimensions. The hand end was completely sealed, removing the hand from the equation entirely. There was no grip to maintain, no handle to hold, and no possibility of disarmament through the conventional method of striking the weapon from the hand. The weapon was the arm. They were one continuous object. Whatever happened to the weapon happened to the person wearing it, and whatever protection the tube provided extended the full length of the forearm, converting the limb from a vulnerable biological structure into an armored instrument that could absorb direct blade contact without injury to the fighter beneath. At the wrist end of the tube, a large semicircular blade was mounted on a rotating mechanism. The geometry of that blade was the weapon's defining innovation. A straight blade cuts in one direction along its edge. A semicircular blade, by contrast, presents a curved, cutting surface that produces a different type of wound depending entirely on the angle and motion of contact. A slight touch from any direction still resulted in a curved laceration rather than a linear one, and curved wounds in soft tissue resist closure in ways that straight cuts do not. Roman arena physicians, who were among the most experienced trauma surgeons of the ancient world, simply due to the volume of work the games provided, documented the difficulty of treating wounds produced by curved blades. The blade's semicircular shape also enabled the scissor's most tactically devastating application. During engagement, the curved geometry could be swept around an opponent's weapon, a sword, a trident, or a spear shaft, and the rotation mechanism allowed the blade to lock around it, trapping the opponent's weapon against the tube. The opponent was then holding a weapon they could not swing, thrust, or withdraw, leaving them completely open. Gladiators who specialized in this weapon were categorized formally as scissores in Roman records. Their opponents faced a fighter whose arm could not be disarmed, whose forearm could not be cut, and whose weapon could steal theirs mid-fight. In the arena's brutal economy of advantages, the scissor left almost none for the other side. Top 9. The Kapinga. Most thrown weapons operated on a simple mechanical premise. A spear needed its point to arrive first. An axe needed its blade to complete the right number of rotations before contact. A standard throwing knife required precise calculation of distance and spin to guarantee that the cutting edge, rather than the handle or spine, met the target. Each of these weapons carried an inherent vulnerability built into their physics, a margin of error between the throw and the intended outcome that training could narrow but never fully eliminate. Wind, distance miscalculation, an unexpected movement from the target, or a slightly imperfect release. Any one of these variables could convert a lethal throw into a harmless one. The Kapinga was designed by the Azande people of Central Africa specifically to make that margin of error irrelevant. The weapon measured roughly 20 inches in length and carried 3 separate blades, each one geometrically distinct from the others, positioned at different points along the central iron body. The forward blade was curved and pointed, designed for penetration on direct contact. The middle blade extended laterally in a crescent or hook configuration, oriented to catch and cut on angled or glancing contact. The rear blade, positioned near the handle end, was shaped to engage targets on reverse contact when the weapon arrived with its back portion leading. The 3-blade configurations covered between them virtually every possible angle of arrival. A Kapinga thrown at a human target did not need to arrive perfectly. It needed only to arrive. The aerodynamic behavior of the weapon was a product of deliberate engineering rather than accident. The uneven blade distribution created a controlled tumbling rotation during flight that was neither the clean spin of a balanced throwing knife nor the random tumble of an unbalanced object. Azande warriors trained extensively with the weapon, learning to read and use that rotation to place the right blade configuration toward the target at contact distance. European military observers encountering the weapon during the 19th century AD documented their assessments in colonial-era reports with a specificity that suggested genuine professional respect. Multiple independent accounts described the Kapinga as the most aerodynamically sophisticated thrown weapon they had encountered across any military tradition they had studied. Shields presented no reliable answer to it. A conventional shield defeated thrown weapons by presenting a flat surface that intercepted the weapon's path. The Kapinga's multiple blade orientations and tumbling flight path meant it could hook over a shield's upper edge, curve around its lateral edge, or drive under its lower edge depending on the throw angle and rotation at the moment of contact. A shield user could not orient their defense to simultaneously cover all 3 possibilities. Production of the Kapinga was controlled entirely by the Avangara royal clan, the ruling dynasty of the Azande people. It was not available for purchase, trade, or independent manufacture. Possession was conferred as recognition of elite warrior status, making each weapon simultaneously a functional instrument and a formal marker of military rank. Ordinary soldiers did not carry it. That exclusivity was intentional. Some weapons are tools. The Kapinga was also a title. Top 10, the Hunga Munga. Every thrown weapon in the history of warfare shared one fundamental weakness. The moment it left the thrower's hand, it belonged to physics and nothing else. If it missed, it was gone, embedded in the ground, skidding across stone, or sliding to a stop somewhere behind the target where retrieving it meant exposure, movement, and vulnerability. The thrower who missed was suddenly a fighter without a weapon, standing at a distance from an opponent who was very much still armed. Entire tactical doctrines across military cultures were built around this reality, training warriors to close distance immediately after a throw, to carry multiple weapons for sequential use, or to abandon throwing entirely in favor of retained close-quarters arms. The Hunga Munga, used by the Mangbetu people and neighboring cultures of Central Africa, approached this problem from a direction that no other military tradition had fully explored. It did not just travel toward the target. Under the right conditions, it came back. The weapon's iron construction featured three distinct functional elements arranged along a single body. A primary forward blade handled the initial strike on a direct throw. A rear-facing hook positioned at the opposite end engaged targets or surfaces during the return arc of the weapon's flight. A side blade angled laterally from the central body created cutting potential on the weapon's rotational axis, activating during the tumbling spin that characterized its flight pattern. The three elements did not operate simultaneously. They activated sequentially depending on which phase of flight the weapon was in and which surface it contacted first. A warrior who understood the weapon's rotation could read, with practice, which blade would be forward at any given point in the arc. The tactical implication of the return arc fundamentally changed the geometry of engagement. A soldier who successfully dodged the initial throw had, with every other throwing weapon in existence, already survived the threat. With the Hunga Munga, the dodge was only the first half of the problem. The weapon's flight path, depending on throw angle and rotational speed, could bring it back through the space the target had just moved into while evading the outward pass. An enemy who stepped sideways to avoid the forward blade could find the rear hook arriving from a completely unexpected vector seconds later. Anticipating one direction of threat was instinctive. Anticipating the same weapon from two opposite directions within a single throw required a level of spatial calculation that combat's chaos rarely permitted. Mangbetu warriors documented in 19th century AD accounts by European observers were noted for carrying multiple Hunga Mungas simultaneously, typically between 3 and 5 weapons on their person. This created a continuous offensive cycle: throw, allow the return arc, retrieve or transition to the next weapon, and throw again, that maintained constant pressure on opponents at a distance with almost no interval of vulnerability between attacks. Against multiple opponents, the system was particularly effective, allowing a single warrior to keep several enemies simultaneously uncertain about where the next threat was originating. In close quarters, the multiple blade angles defeated standard shield positioning by presenting cutting surfaces on axes that no single defensive orientation could cover simultaneously. A missed throw that still kills its target is not a miss. The Hunga Munga was engineered around that exact principle, and the warriors who mastered it never truly threw a weapon away. If these stories of ancient engineering and lethal ingenuity have changed the way you look at the history of warfare, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. We are unearthing the history they tried to bury. Help us plant the seeds for the future. The next treasure from the past will be revealed soon.